Уважаемые коллеги, мы рады приветствовать вас на нашем гостевом мероприятии. У нас сегодня key-спикер – это Иэн МакКей, независимый директор КТЖ. Мы планируем провести нашу сегодняшнюю дискуссию в больше формате Q&A. Будут небольшие презентации со стороны Манаса Гиждуаниева, который откроет сегодняшнюю нашу панельку. У нас также есть представитель с Ассоциации независимых директоров, это Куат Бакирович. Он является членом наблюдательного совета, и он тоже сегодня пришел поддержать нас. Очень хотелось бы, чтобы сегодняшняя наша беседа прошла плодотворно. Мы очень рады всех вас приветствовать. В завершении, пожалуйста, не расходитесь. Мы хотим поприветствовать наших новых членов ассоциации, кто вступил в этом году. Мы приготовили сертификаты и значки, имиджевую продукцию QID. Если кому-то надо убежать, подойдите к Ильшат, она вам выдаст чуть заранее. Пожалуй, я думаю, начнем. Манас, мы хотим поблагодарить платформу МФЦА за прекрасный зал и техническое оборудование, которое они нам предоставили. Спасибо.
Қайырлы кеш, құрметті қатысушылар. Я рада всех приветствовать. Меня зовут Манас Гиждуаниев. Для тех, с кем я не знаком, я представляю Центр зеленых финансов МФЦА. В целом отвечаю за направление сопровождения выпуска устойчивых облигаций локальных и иностранных компаний. Сегодня я хотел бы рассказать немного о рынке устойчивых облигаций, какие бывают вообще виды устойчивых облигаций и финансов, чем отличается процесс выпуска данных облигаций от обычных plain vanilla bonds и какие есть бенефиты для эмитентов и инвесторов. Как мы знаем, в последние годы появились разные виды устойчивых облигаций, привлеченные средства от выпуска которых направляются на конкретные цели. Здесь надо понимать, что деньги целевые, из-за этого название продукта в целом связано с проектом, с целью. Если основная цель выпуска данных облигаций – финансирование экологических или климатических проектов, то маркировка «зеленые облигации» используется. Есть подтип зеленых облигаций, называется «голубые облигации», которые финансируют океанические проекты или на английском «blue bonds». Также есть социальные облигации, которые направлены на решение конкретных социальных проблем и улучшение качества жизни конкретных групп населения. Если эмитент хочет финансировать и зеленые, и социальные проекты в рамках одного выпуска, тогда можно маркировать свои долговые обязательства как устойчивые. Здесь хотелось бы больше рассказать о зеленых облигациях, потому что самый популярный вид устойчивых облигаций – это зеленые облигации все-таки. Зеленые облигации – это долговой инструмент с фиксированным доходом, привлеченные средства от которых направляются на финансирование конкретного проекта. То есть основное условие данных облигаций – направление всех денежных потоков в 100% размере для финансирования конкретного зеленого проекта. Вместе с тем, чтобы получить маркировку как зеленая, эмитенту необходимо предусмотреть у себя в компании механизм отбора и оценки данных проектов. В целом данная процедура состоит из нескольких этапов. Первый этап – это разработка документа, так называемый Green Bond Framework, если речь идет о зеленых облигациях. Если речь идет об устойчивых финансах, это Sustainable Finance Framework. В данном документе эмитент должен прописать, куда будут направляться данные средства, какие есть механизмы мониторинга данных средств и как будет отчитываться. В целом, согласно стандарту Climate Bonds Initiative, эмитент должен ежегодно отчитываться перед инвесторами и дать полную информацию, куда пошли данные средства и какие были бенефиты. В случае зеленых облигаций это экологические бенефиты, в случае социальных облигаций это социальные бенефиты и так далее. Тут хотел бы остановиться, какие проекты являются зеленые, то есть под какие проекты можно выпускать данные облигации, зеленые социальные облигации. Для зеленых облигаций классический пример – это возобновляемые источники энергии, это энергия ветра, солнца, воды и так далее. Есть проекты в области эффективного использования электроэнергии, зеленые здания, которые соответствуют всем международным и локальным стандартам, зеленый транспорт. И также можно использовать данные деньги для тех проектов, которые связаны с адаптацией к изменениям климата, переработкой отходов и так далее. Перейдем к социальным проектам. Согласно принципу социальных облигаций Международной ассоциации рынков капитала, следующие категории проектов являются целевыми. Первое направление – это создание доступной инфраструктуры. Сюда входит транспорт, чистая питьевая вода, электроэнергия, канализация и так далее. Есть вторая категория проектов – это обеспечение доступа к социально значимым услугам, это медицина, образование, финансовые услуги и так далее. Но то, что мы видим последние годы в Казахстане, актуальной темой категорией является именно финансирование доступного жилья и равноправного доступа к активам, в этом случае финансовым услугам. Например, в Казахстане последние 2 года мы видим, активно выпускает гендерные облигации в целях поддержки женского бизнеса. И были кейсы выпуска социальных облигаций для поддержки женщин, чтобы они покупали для себя жилье. Это женская ипотека. В целом, как мы видим на слайде, 2021 год был самым результативным для семейства устойчивых финансов. В 2022 году были ситуации, была очень высокая инфляция, связанных с кризисом в Украине. Из-за этого в целом не только доля устойчивых облигаций, доля обычных облигаций тоже сократился на 24%. Но согласно прогнозам S&P, в 2023 году мы видим то, что рынок восстанавливается, и в этом году ожидается, что объем рынка устойчивых облигаций достигнет $1 триллиона США. Как вы видите на слайде, в целом в 2022 году устойчивые облигации выпускали в 40 валютах разных. Из них самые популярные – это евро, доллар и китайский юань. В целом 3 основных валюты составили 81% рынка устойчивых облигаций, и 42% составил именно рынок евро. Среди стран активным участником рынка устойчивых облигаций являются США, Китай, Франция. Если смотреть по данным, США в 2022 году были выпущены облигации устойчивого развития в размере $21,5 миллиардов США. Китай сделал в том году $85,4 миллиарда США зеленых облигаций, а Франция лидировала именно по социальным облигациям. Там объем составил около $60 миллиардов США. Насчет рынка Казахстана, мы понимаем то, что в Казахстане рынок только-только начинает развиваться. Буквально неделю назад был 3 года, когда состоялся выпуск первых зеленых облигаций Казахстана. 11 августа 2020 года фонд «Дому» выпустил первые зеленые облигации. Сумма была очень маленькая, 200 миллионов тенге или $500 тысяч США. Сейчас мы видим то, что рынок Казахстана, объем рынка Казахстана составляет около $600 миллионов США. Для Казахстана это, мы считаем, что отличный рывок. В целом, если смотреть по инструментам, здесь доминируют именно зеленые инструменты, зеленые облигации и зеленые кредиты. Там еще есть графика, где основные провайдеры second party opinion. Основное отличие зеленых облигаций или устойчивых облигаций от обычных бондов, здесь необходимо доказать верификатору то, что да, эти деньги пойдут точно на зеленые цели и будут бенефиты именно для общества, для экологии и так далее. Здесь есть 2 организации мировые, которые писали стандарты в области устойчивых финансов. Это Climate Bonds Initiative и Международная ассоциация рынков капитала. И эти организации создали список тех компаний, которые могут верифицировать данные облигации. Наша компания GFC, Астана AFC Green Finance Central Ltd, является единственной компанией на данный момент в СНГ и Центральной Азии, которая аккредитован и в CBI, и в ВИКМА. Вот если смотреть по количеству, 11 зеленых и устойчивых облигаций было верифицировано именно GFC. Второе место по Казахстану занимает СССР. Это глобальный лидер в области предоставления заключений в формате second party opinion. Также идет Акра и Green Investment Group, тоже является локальной компанией. Я рассказал о том, какие бывают виды устойчивых облигаций, какие проекты могут быть профинансированы за счет этих облигаций. Наверное, у всех вопрос, зачем же выпускать эти облигации, какие преимущества и бенефиты для инвесторов и эмитентов. В целом, на этом слайде я хотел бы остановиться именно бенефитом для эмитентов. Зеленая облигация всегда помогает эмитентам получить деньги, инвестиции на более удобных, на более льготных условиях. Почему? Потому что это происходит из-за дисбаланса предложения и спроса. Многие компании, фонды, управляющие компании хотят купить зеленые облигации, у которых есть мандат, но не хватает таких выпусков. Из-за этого такие облигации могут привлекаться на более льготных условиях. Второй бенефит – это диверсификация инвесторской базы. Мы понимаем, что все больше инвесторов становятся подписантами принципов ответственного финансирования UNPRI. На данный момент активы под управлением таких компаний составляют 120 триллионов долларов США, и эти же компании могут выступить потенциально как инвесторы данных облигаций. Также выпуск устойчивых облигаций помогает компаниям улучшить имидж, репутацию компании. Почему? Потому что многие компании говорят, что эти компании соблюдают принципы ESG, но на деле это не совсем правда. Когда компания выпускает данные устойчивые облигации, они на деле показывают, они реально финансируют какие-то проекты, которые имеют положительные выгоды для экологии и для общества. И в некоторых странах эмитенты устойчивых облигаций имеют особые льготы. Они могут частично, купоны данных облигаций могут частично субсидироваться государством. За примером далеко ходить не надо. Допустим, например, в Казахстане мы знаем, что купоны зеленых облигаций частично субсидируются и гарантируются государством. Здесь хотел бы добавить насчет наших фондовых площадок. Фондовые биржи тоже поддерживают выпуск данных облигаций. Например, биржа МФЦА и Казахстанская фондовая биржа делают льготные ставки по уплате листинговых сборов для эмитентов зеленых, социальных и устойчивых облигаций. Здесь хотел пару слов рассказать про нашу компанию. Наша компания была создана в 2018 году совместно с Евразийским банком развития и МФЦА. В целом, основная миссия нашей компании – это развитие рынка устойчивых финансов не только в Казахстане и в Центральной Азии. Наша компания работает по двум направлениям. Первое направление – это консалтинг правительств стран СНГ и Центральной Азии по разработке нормативных документов, политик. Например, в Казахстане мы помогали написать таксономию зеленых проектов Казахстана, мы помогаем сейчас Кыргызской республике и так далее. А второе направление, наверное, самое важное, мы сопровождаем выпуск устойчивых облигаций от начала до конца. То есть мы делаем консалтинг изначально эмитентам, компаниям, помогаем, какие документы надо читать, какие проекты надо выбирать. И после этого даем свое заключение, верификацию в формате Second Party Opinion. На данный момент наша компания является аккредитованным верификатором Climate Bonds Initiative и Международного ассоциации рынков капитала и является абсолютным лидером по количеству предоставленных Second Party Opinion по зеленым и социальным облигациям и кредитам. Здесь немного хотел рассказать, чем мы могли бы помочь, какие услуги у нас есть. Мы помогаем компаниям в целом от разработки стратегии развития, написания нефинансовой отчетности, сопровождения компании по выпуску устойчивых облигаций, делаем ESG-скрининг, можем написать политику в области устойчивых финансов компаний. Полностью, получается, мы сопровождаем данных компаний. Здесь еще один маленький слайд про наших клиентов. Кто нам доверяет, это вопрос такой. Наши основные клиенты, партнеры в регионе СНГ, это в основном портфельные компании «Самрук Казна», дочки Байтерека, и крупные частные казахстанские компании, как ESG Казахмас. И в целом у нас есть клиенты Кыргызской республики, в Армении. В том году было 2 выпуска Кыргызской республики, зеленые облигации мы выпускали там и соцоблигации выпускали. В планах работать не только в Кыргызской республике, а также Узбекистан, Таджикистан, Туркменистан и так далее. Тут есть мои контакты. Если у вас есть в планах выпуск устойчивых облигаций, или есть в планах стать более зеленой компанией, да, ESG-комплайн компания, мы готовы помочь. В целом, спасибо за внимание.
Да, Манас, спасибо огромное. Я предлагаю слово дать Иэну МакКей. Спасибо, welcome. Thank you, Iэн, for doing this for us. Thank you so much.
Perhaps you should wait and to see whether you want to clap or not. It might be different. Let me clarify right up front how nice it is to be here, how nice it is to be invited. I hope that those of you who already understand English can also understand a Scottish accent. And I hope also that the translator can also understand the Scottish accent. I'm going to be saying a lot about ESG and the experience that it's been in the UK, but let me be very clear with you. After that, I'll be coming to you, because you are the experts on how that is actually happening within Kazakhstan, and we want to discuss and to share the Kazakh experience. So first things first, who am I? In my career, I've been an educator, I've been a senior trade unionist, I've been a senior business leader, and now, as you can see from the white hair, I'm much more of a senior citizen, which is what I do. My last role was in heading up Royal Mail Group in Scotland, as we prepared what was a 300-year-old institution, $15 billion of a turnover, 250,000 of employees. We were preparing that institution for commercialization. In the last 12 years or so, my main work has been in boards and in other institutional roles. I've ranged over policing and security, education and skills, telecoms, logistics, pay, HR, and including I've been a member for around 6 years of the National Health Service in the UK's peer review body, where 6 of us had to sit like Solomon and make decisions on behalf of 1.5 million people's wages and salaries, with a turnover at that time when I was there of somewhere around $40 billion. That's the time when you get the personal letter from the Chancellor of the Exchequer saying, please don't give them too much money. When I have the time, I have my own little company, as I'm sure many of you do, where I offer facilitation and mediation and basically trying to sort out what are often very horrible boardroom level problems. I work really through confidentially with people and on a word-to-mouth basis. I even on one job managed to help God with a problem that I was given, but that, as they say, is another story for another time. My governance credentials are that I was Scottish chairman of the Institute of Directors for several years. I saw them through both the Scottish independence referendum and the Brexit referendum. I was part of the UK IOD leadership. I've taught on IOD education courses. I continue to teach MBA students and others in Stirling University Management School, where they've also made me a professor. I've chaired boards. I've chaired and been members of REMCO, Nominations, Strategy, Audit Committee. I've been a SID. I have reviewed both board and company governance. I have specialised mainly in HR, in risk, training, and in soft skills. And here, in Kazakhstan, I am very pleased to say, as you have heard, that I am an independent director, just like you. For me, it's at KTJ, where I chair REMCO in nominations, and I'm a member of strategy and audit. And I have to tell you that the only reason that I am here in Kazakhstan is a thing like this. It's a business card. I sat on the board of Lothian Buses, a little 150 million bus company in Edinburgh. And beside me on the board was a man called Chris Walton, who one or two of you may have come across here in Kazakhstan. Latterly, he was the chair at KMG. He's only just stood down from that. At the time, we were on the board together, and Chris was also on the KTJ board. as a member. And we happened at one time to take out his business card, and I saw it. And I said, where the hell did you get such a cool business card? I want a business card that says that I am on the board of the Kazakhstan National Railway Company. So the only reason I came to Kazakhstan was to get the business card, and I'm here now. Let's get down to business. For many of you in the room, you will have more expertise than I have in the boardroom and in corporate governance. Many of you, like me, will have European or perhaps American experience as well as Kazakh experience in governance. I look around you and none of you look like my grandmother, so I'm not going to tell my grandmother how to suck eggs. You know that already. That's not what I'm here for. But the lesson of my experience on both sides of the bargaining table is that we, all of us, progress by finding reasons to progress together. And we learn by learning from each other. And I hope that that's the spirit of this evening that we will carry forward with. ESG, Environment, Social, Governance. Now, if this word combination makes you groan, then you're not alone. CGI, who some of you may have come across, the Chartered Governance Institute in the UK and Ireland, has just published this year's Boardroom Bellwether report. Okay? The report is based on responses from the company secretaries of what they call the FTSE 350. So it's the FTSE 100 and the FTSE 250 combined, all of the company secretaries. You'll agree with me that is a pretty authoritative group of professionals within governance. 81% of those who were polled from that authoritative group said that they found it either fairly or very difficult to meet ESG disclosure requirements. 81%. The same amount of people said that they found that the increased reporting, the requirements that were associated with ESG, were actually reducing the time available for strategic discussion at board level. Now think about that for a moment. 80-odd% of people are saying that the board is not actually able to do the thing that the board is there for, the strategic discussion which is central to the board's work, because of the reporting requirements of ESG. Worse than this, in a cohort who, let's remember, would find it very difficult to tie their own Gucci shoelaces, yeah? They're always wanting to find someone else to do the work. 64% of governance teams have found it difficult to find skilled talent in the last year. So whoever thought that corporate governance would one day be sexy to be involved with? And who thought that it could even get you a good job? That seems to be where we are. But 81% of that very authoritative cohort are finding ESG matters to be difficult or even overwhelming. However, at the same time, that same group is saying that climate change is driving increased exposure to risk. 82% are saying that. 94% claim that their board is gender diverse. 77% claim that their board is ethnically diverse. They don't, of course, emphasize the fact that they have a better spread of business experience on their board than they do ethnicity, around a third better, in fact. Nor do they advertise the fact that the geographic spread among their directors is actually 4 times better than the spread of socio-economic background of their directors. So there ain't many poor kids there. The poor kids, I'm afraid, are still outside the boardroom. But they're not stupid. They're not unaware of realities. They report that 4 years ago, over 50% of their boards would have discussed climate change either once in a year or not at all. Now, this summer, these same people are reporting that their boards, just under 50% of their boards, will have discussed climate change in their board meeting at least 4 to 7 times a year. 4 to 7 times. That's effectively every board meeting. And by the way, before I move on, that same survey tells us that the top 3 perceived risks at the moment, among that 350, has moved on from last year, where it was global economics at number 1, geopolitical tensions, I think we know about them in Kazakhstan, geopolitical tensions was number 2, cyber risk was number 3. This year, we have seen the reassertion of cyber risk back to number 1, where it has been for the last 7 or 8 years. We still have global economics down as the number 2, and it won't surprise you that climate change has now come in as the number 3 perceived risk among that whole group. It gives you some idea, I think, of just how important these matters are being seen. My apologies, I do have a cold. I'll apologise for that. I hope I don't give you all the cold. When you think of those 3 risks, I wonder what the Kazakh ones are, if we were to ask you to put 3 risks together. But let me get back to the theme. What's so scary and difficult about ESG? Why does it seem so scary and difficult? In some places, it's become quite political. Like most things in the world, the Trump camp in the USA have decided that they don't like it, but then they've probably decided that they don't like most things. They're calling it woke capitalism, which I think is quite a nice name. Among more rational people in the Trump camp, there are genuine concerns that ESG is too imprecise, is too unfocused, and it's really rather a strange mix. Environment and social, you can see the 2 of them hanging out together. You can see where they're linked to each other. But then you bring in governance. You know, it's like, these 2 have got together and then this third guy turns up and it's just, what? What are you doing here? If this was some kind of philosophy lecture, I would say, if you look at what Gilbert Ryle, the English linguistic philosopher, said, putting governance in there seems like a category mistake. It seems like we've actually just slotted in something to get it out of the way. But the one thing that's very clear about it is that our boardrooms are moving beyond the balance sheet. And I think that's the key thing to take from that. We are moving beyond the balance sheet. The era of Thatcher and Reagan, what I would call the era of greed, also gave us Milton Friedman, who many of you will have come across, and his monetarism, the great guru of monetarism. It was him who first declared that the primary role for directors was to focus on shareholder value achieved through financial profit. Yeah? That was the great idea that has dominated thinking in boardrooms for 40 years. That concept underpins much of company law still. Even in the UK, that's still there, it's still around. But I think that concept has been much undermined, particularly since the crash of 2008, where people started to question those values, question what it was taking them towards. Instead, in modern governance, and in particular in the UK corporate code, which I think is so important to an institution like AIFC here, and many of you, in the corporate code, what we're emphasising now, of course, is that the focus should not be solely on shareholder value. The focus instead should be on stakeholders. Yes, shareholders obviously are one of those stakeholders. But it has now to sit alongside environmental action, employee satisfaction, customer satisfaction, sustainability, diversity, a bunch of other key issues that the board would feel that it must be aware of and must also serve, not just that one master that it did before, but these other critical factors. If you take the view of the Business Roundtable that some of you may have come across, it's the USA's most influential gathering of CEOs, the Business Roundtable. In 2019, they redefined their statement of the purpose of a corporation, their absolute heart of their whole raison d'etre. They redefined it to include that there should be a fundamental commitment to all of our stakeholders in their definition of a business, not just the shareholders. In the UK, while the interests of shareholders is still in pole position in our legislation, there is an enormous momentum behind something that some of you may have come across called the Better Business Act campaign. It's a campaign which IOD supports, where we are looking for changes in the Companies Act in line with what I'm talking about here. Progressive formulations that start to move more towards a stakeholder concept and away from shareholder value. In many ways, I think, the days of the primacy of the shareholder are in many ways numbered. Now, I know when I talk about shareholders, that's a different concept within a UK situation than it is here in Kazakhstan, and I hope that's one of the things that we will examine ourselves. So, if Friedman worshipped profits for profit's sake, ESG also actually makes good business sense. It's not that new a concept. The United Nations first came up with this in 2004. It's almost 20 years old. They were mostly laughed at the time. But there are now 3,000 asset manager signatories to the UN Principles for Responsible Investment, and between them, they are managing somewhere in the region of $3 trillion. That's quite a big lobby. The value of ESG assets is also growing remarkably, and in less than 4 years' time, it is expected that 21.5% of the total global assets under management will be ESG related. That's a big number. That's an awful lot of asset management being linked to ESG. Now, there are important differences there. You will tend to find that younger investors will be more orientated towards ESG. You will also find, remarkably, that they will be prepared to take a loss in the short term in order to support ESG values. And it isn't all that often that you find hedge funds and so on willing to take a loss on something. Let me just say that for some of us who are as old as me, if you remember some of the campaigns that happened within the business community on apartheid in South Africa, for example, or on the tobacco companies, I think this campaign on ESG actually is much bigger than even those were in their day. Let me take one practical example. Norway's sovereign fund. The Norwegians were much, much better than the UK. They actually saved the windfall energy profits from oil and gas, unlike the UK, who tended to squander most of it. Their fund now controls $1.3 trillion. It also requires, in order to get any money from Norway's sovereign fund, it requires you as a business to be net zero. 9,000 companies must be net zero to get any money from the Norwegian fund. They're also calling for ESG testing requirements to be hardened up. Only a couple of years ago, 3 major companies who were benefiting from considerable investment from the Norwegian sovereign fund had that funding withdrawn because they had failed their ESG tests. It's something to think about. Money talks, as we all know. And what money is telling you at the moment is have some respect for ESG. So, if the law is changing and if investment policy is changing, what about the customers? What about the people who are buying all of the goods out there? In February of this year, McKinsey, that wonderful organisation who charges so much money for their services, McKinsey published an absolutely massive report on US sales, which shows a growing appetite for more sustainable and ethically sourced products and services. Let me tell you what they did. They analysed 5 years, 5 complete years of US sales data from 2017 to 2022, 600,000 individual product lines. I mean, I'll give them that. They do at least do something with the money that we give them. 44,000 brands, 32 categories of food, beverage, personal care, household spend, around $400 billion a year of annual retail. Okay, that's a big survey. That's pretty authoritative. So what did it tell them? Products that were making ESG-related claims accounted for 56% of all growth in that cohort. That was about 18% more than they should have grown. Okay, 56% of the whole lot. In addition, those products averaged 28% cumulative growth across the whole range. The rest, about 20%. Overall, in 2/3 of all categories, the products that made ESG-related claims were growing faster than those that didn't. I think that's clear and substantial evidence that this is not some passing phenomenon that is somehow or other going to drift away. If the law is moving, if investors is moving, if customers are moving, you really are a pretty stupid business person that doesn't take account of that. But there's a sting in the tail, of course. Customers won't allow you to greenwash. Greenwashing is not going to work. If a company is claiming meaningful ESG impact, then it better deliver. Woe betide a Nike that's then found to be employing child labour, or a water company that's found to be pouring sewage onto public beaches. The Joe public will not stand for that kind of behaviour. So where does this take us? Well, for one thing, it's real. It's not pretend. Like many of you, I can remember, or I hope like many of you, you're all far too young, I can remember the fashion for CSR. Some of us who were in boardrooms will remember the fashion of CSR, corporate social responsibility. Some of us are probably still doing it. Company largesse into the community, which actually did some good in many places, I'm sure, but it rarely moved beyond, I'm being cynical, it rarely moved beyond a nice photo opportunity, some tax deductibles put out into the community. I did it myself. There's still a cathedral organ in the Kirkwall in the Orkney Islands in Scotland, which still sounds great because I gave it £35,000 in order to repair it some 10 years ago or so. But ESG is not that kind of pretend thing, I would say to you. There are very real issues with this Gordian knot of competing frameworks, tables, standards, mostly produced, I'm afraid, by hordes of consultants, advisors, rating agencies, data providers, aggregators, benchmarkers, civil servants. That's right, people like us that do those kind of things. We've overcomplicated so much of this. But I think that the problem is moving on. In particular, I would direct you towards the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. They have developed, let's give it a bit easier, TCFD. They've developed a set of recommendations that are changing the way that organisations manage climate risks and opportunities. Their structures and their metrics are now offering a common standard. Some 60% of the world's 100 top public companies are now signed up to TCFD standards. In the UK, it's now mandatory for over 1,300 of some of our biggest registered companies and financial institutions over there to show in their annual report their compliance with TCFD reporting requirements. It's not something you might like to do, it's mandatory. You've got to do it or you've got to explain for yourself. They were actually the first G20 country to do so, which, believe me, for the dreadful government that we have at the moment, that was a pretty good move on their part. Europe is about to go even further than that, and Europe is on the verge of legislating for comprehensive reporting standards, not just for climate change, but for the whole of ESG. And that will have a big effect on anybody that thinks that they're going to have some kind of trading with Europe, as I'd imagine most of you will. The USA is also not very far behind, and more importantly there, the Biden administration is offering support for companies that are making these changes, and that's important. Europe is also considering having incentives of this kind, and the UK government is also under pressure to follow suit because, apart from anything else, the UK has had a hemorrhage of companies leaving London for the USA and for Europe because of Brexit and because of the Brexit effect. ESG isn't a posture or a gesture or woke. It's part of a much larger evolution in how companies operate within society and between each other. It's part of a growing demand and a recognition that the affairs of business have to be driven by the needs and the concerns of much wider groups of stakeholders than those who simply hold the capital. In truth, it's one among many of the intangible assets that can create or can destroy long-term value. It's just as important than its better-known risk siblings of management quality, corporate culture, or innovative capability. It is in that category, it is in that family. In the end, I would put it to you, we will all be judged not on how well we improve our ESG performance, any more than it is on all of those other intangible assets. In the UK and here in Kazakhstan, I would say to you that we will be judged on whether we build great companies, not just companies that are great at ESG. Thanks very much.
Институту директоров Великобритании в этом году исполняется 120 лет. Он также являлся членом совета по лидерству, как он уже говорил. У нас сегодня присутствует тоже наш член наблюдательного совета Куат Бакирович. Он тоже дипломированный директор Института директоров Великобритании. Он представляет, скажем так, казахстанскую экспертизу сегодня на нашей тоже панельной сессии. Мы очень рады искренне сотрудничеству с Институтом директоров. Вы знаете, ассоциация QID проводит международную сертификацию Института директоров. Поэтому мы поощряем всех директоров проходить наши казахстанские программы и британскую программу Института директоров. Брошюрки имеются, если кому-то интересно, мы будем рады ответить на вопросы. Сейчас хотелось бы открыть дискуссию. Пожалуйста, просим воспользоваться возможностью задать вопросы к экспертам по ESG-теме, может быть, интересны темы любого другого характера, лидерства, HR. Пожалуйста, будем рады. Да, можно. Давайте будем так ручку поднимать, Марат, с той стороны, я с этой стороны.
Да, добрый день, Лариса Мельник, ESG консультант и тренер, поэтому тема моя. Во-первых, спасибо большое, что все присоединились к нам и спикерам, что поделились своим опытом. У меня такой вопрос, скорее, как с позиции независимого директора, потому что я читаю тренинги разным и нашим национальным компаниям, в том числе и представителям КТЖ. Есть и топ-менеджмент, и middle-менеджмент, которые понимают всю важность повестки, которые понимают необходимость изменений, трансформации и там возможностей. Но основной вопрос, который все время звучит, а как нам вот implementation сделать на все уровни? Как нам показать и рассказать на всех уровнях компании, что это действительно важно, потому что людей волнуют совершенно другие вещи. У меня еще второй вопрос есть. Тоже. Ну и второй вопрос, он тоже, наверное, связан такой с устойчивой повесткой. Это про репутацию компаний. Мы все живем в Казахстане. Мы, наверное, иногда слишком много знаем про наши национальные холдинги. И есть такое ощущение, что вопросами управления репутацией как-то либо не хотят, либо плохо прорабатываются. Но вопрос репутации — это тоже про социальную ответственность, про экологическую ответственность. И, наверное, вот тоже с точки зрения независимого директора, как вот донести, может, какие-то советы есть, как вот донести вот важность этой повестки, что компания должна управлять своей ситуацией, да, репутацией, не ждать, когда со СМИ прилетают какие-то вещи, и вы в таком же потоке неуправляемом становитесь и не можете, ну, никак это контролировать. Спасибо.
The first thing I would say to you is, as you can expect, this is not just a Kazakhstan problem. Believe me, this is a big problem all over. I remember sitting with about this amount of people when we first brought together all of the main leaders within Royal Mail Group, when we were setting out on our journey. And there was a guy from McKinsey standing up here, and he was saying, you are the leaders. You are the people that must now carry this forward, yeah? And you saw everyone who's sitting there looking around like this, saying, you know, sorry, where are these leaders? Who are you talking about? Us? Oh my God. Most of us, it's certainly my experience, if you have a very difficult concept that is going to require to change the culture and the way of operating of a large organisation, yeah? We all know the old adage, you know, culture eats strategy for breakfast, yeah? If you are in that situation, it is actually really quite easy, in my opinion, to get the senior leadership to understand it. Relatively easy. I mean, there may be one or two idiots, but most of them will understand it. If you go to the people on the ground and you speak to them properly and listen, strangely enough, they will also understand it. The problem is in between. If we think of middle managers, if I am a successful middle manager in an organisation with a culture that requires to change, yeah? I got to the position that I was in by being good at doing the bad things. I got there in the culture that is the culture we want to change. So those middle managers are not incentivized to change. It's necessary, therefore, in my opinion, for an organisation facing up to that to very consciously develop a set of new leadership behaviours that it requires, particularly from its middle managers. And you don't then just send out a memo. You actively seek the training, the work with people to actually embed that new way of behaving. Because it isn't actually about a policy. It's not about learning that we have to change. It's not about, oh, look at these numbers. It's about your behaviour that you bring to work every day when you come to your work. And that's why I think, you know, the major question there is a training question, and the major answer is at that group of people. I mean, I actually got the job of doing that. We had 250,000 people, yeah? I can't remember what the actual number was. It was something like 17,000 middle managers. Have you ever tried to get 17,000 people from across the whole of a country into one room? It's difficult, yeah? We had to develop all of our learning behaviours, and we then had to work out a training programme that, you know, we could do it. And we had a whole bunch of idiots, some of whom said, oh, I'm far too important to come to training. We let them get away with that for 3 times, and we said, if you don't turn up for the 4th one, you're sacked. We don't care where you are in the company. If you don't turn up for your 4th time we asked you to come, you're sacked. Because if you don't change your behavior, there's no job for you here. And we encourage them to come along. So that would be my answer, is, that's what we have to recognize. Your observation, I think, is spot on. It is where we are, but we have to have a realistic program that actually allows us to tackle it.
Несколько ремарок, может быть, я так начну в начале, потому что я вот сегодня в качестве, мы организовали эту сессию панельную вместе с руководством Института независимых директоров, нашего же Казахстанского института независимых директоров. Я хотел несколько ремарок сказать. Сам ESG, в принципе, если смотреть исторический экскурс, впервые прозвучало эти принципы были озвучены Кофи Аннаном в 2004 году, вы помните, да? ESG с этого момента времени достаточно длительный период прошел, много вещей поменялось, внедрилось, но много еще делается. Но последние, наверное, 5-6 лет это активизировалось во всем мире, и особенно активизировалось у нас, конечно, безусловно, в Казахстане. Если говорить о применении этих принципов, то они происходят изменения, наверное, и на самом большом уровне. Вы вот знаете, например, Норвежский суверенный фонд в 2019 году они отказались от инвестирования в угольную отрасль и в нефтяную. Во все инструменты связаны. Это огромный пласт потенциальных инвестиций, но они пошли на этот осознанный шаг. Мистер МакКей озвучивал, что у нас много уделялось внимания, наверное, но не S и G. Сейчас это меняется, особенно это благодаря площадке на МФЦА. Я что хотел сказать, сегодня вот вы видите, у нас звучит Иэн МакКей, независимый директор КТЖ. Вот это, наверное, самая основа, что ответственность за внедрение, наверное, во многом зависит от независимых директоров. Действительно ли они будут проводить эту политику, и здесь очень правильный в этом контексте вопрос и правильная ремарка. У нас в последнее время и изменилось вообще, все драматично менялось, особенно после пандемии, и вот эти две буквы ESG полностью были введены в эту парадигму обсуждения и так далее. Социальная ответственность – это отношение к персоналу. Мы все перешли на определенный режим работы во время пандемии. Онлайн, офлайн, оно много скорректировало, подняла многие вопросы удовлетворенности персонала, отношения с контрпартнерами, отношения уже государства со структурами, с бизнес-структурами и так далее. G, управление, оно тоже, пандемия внесла дополнительные корректировки. Управление здесь какое? С точки зрения акционеров, с точки зрения топ-менеджмента, с точки зрения персонала, с точки зрения взаимодействия государства. И здесь вот роль независимых директоров, она действительно только возрастает. Понятно, здесь есть несколько направлений и аспектов. Одно отношение конкретно государства к этой проблематике. Будет ли это внедряться? Есть определенные цифры, мы знаем, что, допустим, за истекшие 2-3 года рынок потенциальной инвестиций, связанные именно в компании, которые соблюдают эти принципы, он сейчас достигнет к 2025 году, говорят, там 53 триллионов долларов. Общий рынок 140 триллионов долларов. То есть 30% уже будут проходить только через призму соответствия ESG-стандартам. Второе направление – это, конечно, сами компании как относятся. Многие говорят, я не являюсь не вовлечен в производство, я не связан с экологией. На самом деле это не так. И многие компании все равно связаны, условно говоря. Ты производишь обувь, но подошву ты какую используешь? Если у тебя есть коллаборация с компаниями, где ты уже используешь бэушные шины, это уже другой аспект. Ты не наносишь дополнительный урон природе и так далее. Третье, наверное, это отношения... То есть это все компании должны быть, не только которые связаны с климатом, но и параллельно. Третье отношение, наверное, самого общества, конкретных лиц, физических и так далее, управляющих этим компанией. И здесь вот роль независимых директоров, еще раз повторяюсь, она возрастает. Акционерное общество, есть интересы, понятно, у акционеров получить прибыль. Есть интересы у совета директоров тоже обеспечить правильное функционирование, добавленную стоимость самой компании, рыночную стоимость. Но есть независимые директора, которые должны абстрагироваться от этих целей, а все-таки их придерживаться целей ESG. И здесь вот этот институт, он должен развиваться. У нас примеры там на рынках Европы, UK, североамериканских, мы видим, это давно шагнуло вперед. Здесь много зависит от независимых директоров. И вот вы коучер, вы это проводите, это очень правильно. Здесь должна быть, наверное, соответствующая сертификация и отношения. Вот об этом я и говорил, что самое главное поведение конкретного независимого. Твердость, волевые решения, доведение до конца и так далее. Вот эти принципы, наверное, если... Сейчас у нас еще общие тенденции. А еще хотел отметить, что есть крупные компании, которые могут это внедрять, есть государственные компании. У нас вот лидеры, наверное, вот господин Ульфакурка добавит, там лидеры есть у нас нацкомпания, наверное, Кигок где-то в каком... Нет, ну хорошо, Ульфакурка, прокомментируйте, я извиняюсь, что пробегаю к вашей помощи. А есть компании, которые небольшие, не хватает где-то экспертизы, может быть, ненужная сертификация, не видят перспектив. Но на самом деле, еще я коснулся темы объема больших инвестиций, которые будут приходить, они будут именно на соответствии ESG. Здесь в этом отношении, наверное, кто может помочь, это, я думаю, банки. У нас это кровеносная система, доставка средств. И всегда банки у нас имели экспертизу в этом вопросе. Если банки, а в банках это тоже сначала надо пройти свое становление. Это свой институт независимых директоров банков. У нас сейчас несколько лет уже полемика идет, внедряется, уже делает кто-то отчеты и так далее. Но вот роль независимых директоров именно в банках будет очень значительна с точки зрения внедрения принципа. Банки здесь не для себя, а как консультанты, как институты, которые имеют экспертизу и которые призваны привлекать средства и направлять их в экономику, здесь должны выступить, наверное, какой-то главенствующей роли. Ну, извиняюсь, так долго, может быть. Спасибо.
Я отмечу, Кот Бакирович является независимым директором банка «Центр кредит». Да. Да, но ему просто мы не сделали интродакшн, поэтому пытаюсь. Есть ли еще вопросы в аудитории?
Добрый день. Светлана Бельсейтова, независимый директор Customer Trans. Мы с Иэном знакомы. На заслушивании как раз мы были в КТЖ. У меня два вопроса. Один лично к Иэну, второй, первый вот к вам. Только спасибо большое, что вы заговорили как раз-таки о необходимости тона, так будем говорить, когда мы говорим про совет директоров, тон сверху, да, то есть мы задаем этот тон сверху, мы говорим о необходимости, о важности внедрения этой культуры, изменения ценностного подхода, для того, чтобы потом люди могли нам демонстрировать поведением, как говорил правильно Иэн, о том, что они изменились, да, о том, что вот теперь вопросы эти, они, являются важными. Вот теперь вопрос, да, как вообще на самом деле, есть ли какие-то у нас взаимодействия с государством, с государственными структурами, которые бы каким-то образом стимулировали, помогали нашим акционерам, нашим предпринимателям внедрять эти подходы. Допустим, я занимаюсь больше 20 лет внедрением систем менеджмента качества, экологического менеджмента, энергетического менеджмента, безопасности, охраны здоровья, SA 8000, про который вы говорили, социальной ответственности. И могу сказать честно, что, конечно, надо понимать, что без соответствующих инструментов стимулирования со стороны государства эти ценности не придут. Потому что уровень нашего мировоззрения, любого нашего акционера, владельца бизнеса, он на уровне выживания. Понятно, да? То есть вот то, что говорил Иэн, что была парадигма больше заработать, это же эволюционная составляющая. То есть ценности меняются, как меняется мировоззрение, как меняется внешняя среда. Вот вопрос первый это к вам по отношению, как мы работаем с государством в отношении стимулирования. И второй вопрос просто к Иэну. Вы член независимый директор КТЖ, я независимый директор КТТ. Скажите, пожалуйста, за последний год сколько советов директоров или сколько часов было посвящено изменению климата лично в КТЖ? Вот вы приводили пример шотландский. Я скажу свой пример: ни одного. Про изменение климата ни одного. У вас? Спасибо. Спасибо.
I think if you spent not a single hour, you definitely need to go back and tell them to change the way that they do things. We certainly have spent a lot more than a single hour on climate change related issues in the main board, both in the main board, in fact even just today we were having that discussion, but also particularly in our health and safety committees and so on. not unsurprisingly, the political situation, the geopolitics have taken up a hell of a lot more time than climate change. But even if you look at its most simple level, we have 2 ports on the Caspian Sea, yeah, which we're developing, particularly for the middle corridor, absolutely vital for the stuff that your company and my company do. If the Caspian Sea shrinks, all of a sudden your port is in a very difficult position because there'll be a big gap between where the boat can come and where your trains can come, and how the hell do you get your stuff over there? So, you know, in a situation like that, which might sound as if I'm being flippant, it's absolutely vital that one is knowledgeable and knows, you know, just where are things going, what is happening with water, even in a situation like the Caspian. But, you know, it's out there for all the rest of the areas as well. In the UK, for example, at the moment, what we are dealing with is not so much, say, rising seawater or whatever. It's the volatility of the weather. It's the fact that, you know, at times when you might have planned housing, for example, based on what has happened in the last 100 years in that area, and then all of a sudden we are having extreme weather which has not been seen for 100 years. And I think that's really the main question on that, is that boards have to stop just taking the same old attitude to it. Boards have to question if your people come to you and say, oh, well, this is based on 100 years of evidence, it's time to say to them, well, actually, folks, things are happening just now that haven't happened in the last 100 years. So come back with your new numbers and tell us what it is that we've got to do. And I think that's the kind of challenge that independent directors should be putting in. But forgive me for one moment, just to take up another point that your question stimulated. If I came across from the UK with my corporate code in my hand, and I came to all of the companies, including the portfolio companies under Samruk, and I said, okay, guys, here's the rules. Here's what the code says. Here is how it must be, you know? And you're not doing it just now, therefore you must change everything that you're doing so that you're actually in line with corporate code, otherwise you're wrong. Because this is a corporate code and this is how governance should be done. If I came across like that, I would be an idiot. What you've actually got to do, in my view, is adopt the governance which is most appropriate to the situation that you are in. Yes, we need the fundamental values that underpin that governance, but it has to be appropriate to where we are. Let me give you a dead obvious example. I had a guy come to me running a small alternative energy company. And he said, I know that I must do something about my governance, so tell me what to do. Now, I could have got the government code, and I could have got, you know, I could have said, okay, you need a board, and you need a REMCO, and you need a nominations committee, and you need, you know, I could have done all of that. There were only 4 people in this company. They couldn't have formed 4 boards. It would have been entirely inappropriate to ask them to have that kind of organised system of corporate governance in a situation where it would have just been silly. Instead, what you had to say to them was, okay, you know, are you talking to each other? Are you finding ways that you're actually talking to each other? Are you talking through some of the values that you require as a company to be moving forward? Are you looking at your history? Are you keeping good records? Are you using your accountant, you know, to keep you advised of where the law is changing and so on? That was the proper advice for the level that you were with. And let me be slightly controversial. I could look at a situation like Samruk and the companies, and I could say, hang on, I'm on the board here, and the board is the one that's supposed to be making the decisions. Yeah? I mean, that's the way I was brought up. Board decisions for company. Shareholder, really important. Thanks very much for the advice, but you can be quiet now. You can go away now. You know, you've had your AGM, get out. You know, we take the decisions here. You could take that attitude. That would, I think, be a very traditional attitude to the role of the shareholder as opposed to the independent directors and the executive of a company, yeah? But think about what I was saying to you about reflecting the stakeholders, not just the shareholders. Who are the stakeholders? The people? The government? The folk who are trying to develop interaction between different parts of the state apparatus? The people who are working with the education system and skills and in training and making sure that we have a workforce? If I actually take that developed ESG view of governance and I say that I must have a system of governance which actually reflects the stakeholders here, surprise, surprise, you guys are actually in some ways ahead of where the UK is. Because in some ways, and I know that many of you will say, oh, you know, it's too heavy-handed or it's too political or something. But in some ways, you already in some of your structures, particularly in portfolio companies that I'm talking about, you are already reflecting the values that we are trying to get companies in the UK to begin to adopt. We're trying to get them to start thinking about their customers. We're trying to get them to start reflecting the communities within they work. We're trying to get them to think about national questions, not just their own private interests. It's a thought that Kazakhstan actually, in some ways, is ahead of the UK and the US in these matters. So we have to be adaptive. It's like most things in life. You actually, well, I do a lot of chasing of horses on racetracks. You choose the horse for the course. You don't choose the horse for the other course. You choose the horse that's going to be for the race. And I think in many ways we have to adapt good governance so that it is good governance in the situation that you need the governance.
Три слова. Ну, во-первых, я только учусь, я сам не эксперт, если ESG. С точки зрения, ну вот вопросы задели очень такой действительно серьезно большой, как государство помогает. Понятно, что вот если с точки зрения environment, государство присоединилось ко всем соглашениям о снижении там, выбросов и так далее, это общая тенденция. С точки зрения дальнейшего внедрения и поддержки, есть, например, налоговое законодательство, которое будет стимулировать каких-то, будет льготировать те вещи, где будут тратиться именно не только на кого. Площадки нету, вам скажу сразу. Она есть такая, как бы, ну, есть фидбэк, например, от предпринимательства, вообще, от американцев. Есть уже конкретные кейсы, где вот в крупных у нас компаниях, вы сами видели, где связано с недолжным отношением к персоналу. Есть у нас огромный блок компаний производственных, которые принадлежат государству, где тоже можно это влиять через саму казна. Такой вот конкретной площадки. Я не работаю в государственной службе, я там давно ушел. Наверное, что-то обсуждается, что-то идет. Ну, и где-то понимают тенденции, что вот мы экспорт-ориентированные, в какой-то момент это будет выдвигаться требования, наверное, со стороны того, что а как у вас соответствуют ли ваши компании, которые что-то отправляют на экспорт, в основном сырье, соответствуют ли не ESG. И самое главное, объем инвестиций, о котором говорит президент, и о том, что государство, а именно правительство, должно быть слышащим, этот объем инвестиций в какой-то перспективе уже, достаточно недолгосрочной, а среднесрочной, он будет связан именно с соответствием принципам ESG.
I do have a question for John Iэн МакКей. My name is Sabit Mukanov. I'm representative of АО НК University. I'm currently the head of Creative Industries Hubs. And we've been promoting ESGs for the last 3 years. I mean, I've seen from, first of all, I want to say thank you. We've seen from your speech that you were speaking from the top of your head. I really admire your expertise in this topic. First of all, when coming to this evening, I thought it's really impossible to compare UK and Kazakhstan in ESG politics, to be honest. And the reason for that is the different metric system behind. So I do have a question here, particular question, which metric system do you use at the company you're currently employed as a QID? And is it Deloitte or McKinsey, as you mentioned, or any other company? And how successful were you in implementing these methods within your company? I mean, besides the corporate culture and the middle management who doesn't understand the ESG politics in general. Thank you.
I'm far too old to be currently managing a company myself. My own company is me, and my corporate governance of me is excellent, obviously. It's very, very good. I am E and S and G all in one person, so it's easy. The serious answer, I think, is what I was trying to get at the end of the speech. We have a problem that many of us in this room, have actually been part of the creation. We've developed too many competing systems. Yeah, that's the problem just now. So that, we, for example, within KTJ, we had a ESG report done by, can't remember their name, Moody's, I think it was. Some years before, we would have had PwC involved in doing some work. Did they use the same metrics? Probably not. Probably not. They might have come to the same conclusions, but probably not the same metrics. How are we actually developing it? Mostly we're developing the skills of our own people to begin to do those metrics and to actually, to be honest, in an organisation that size, you're trying to actually filter it down so that it's happening in the company as a whole. That's the real difficulty for companies like that. Back in the UK, there is a plethora, and that's part of the problem. That's why what I was saying about on the green side, beginning to establish standards, those standards being adopted by big companies and made real by big companies, then being legislated for, that's how you start to move forward. That's how you start to set a gold standard, as to what's going to be expected. So in a way, I suppose I could sit here and say, well, whoever of you are representing some of those standards, whichever of you pays me the most money, I'll say that you're the best. But that is not the way to do business. The way to do business is for us to find the proper ways of valuing that. That's not answering your question in some ways, but there isn't actually an answer to the question. I think the last 5-6 years that we've come through has generated something of a mess. It's a Gordian knot that so many if you think about the people who are not committed to ESG, think of all those people on boards and in senior management that you have met, who you say things like that to them and they go, oh, that's all a piece of nonsense. I'm just going to get on with production. I'm only going to get on with profit. Yeah, you've met hundreds of these people. How do you convince them if you don't know yourself what your standards are? No use. So instead, get the standards right, get them gold standard, get them legislated for. Then it's a hell of a lot easier because you say, do you know what, pal? If you don't do it, you're getting sacked. So that makes life so much easier to sell ESG at that point.
My name is Camila. I'm a corporate governance consultant, and I'm a former independent director myself. And it's not a question, it's more of an advice seeking from you. I've been doing corporate governance assessment.
I can send you my day rate if that's easy, yeah.
By doing corporate governance assessment for quite some time in national companies, I know a lot of problems that we're facing nowadays. And one of them is that you have mentioned that it's middle management that's causing most of the problem with implementing ESG. I would add to what you have said, not only they afraid, they don't want additional work to be done because it requires a lot, because the risk management has to put much more on themselves. Virtually every single department has to add something on top of their ongoing work, right? And the second thing is that you and Quad has been saying that independent directors have to impose this and that. They need to be first at this and that. But what I see is that in Kazakhstan, most of independent directors are not so independent. They're more of a pocket directors who do what they've been asked to do. This is why they either change very fast, like every year or so, because they've been asked to go, or they just sit there for years, for like 10 years, 8 years, and so on. So how are we going to impose ESG and set the tone from above if we're not so independent, if those people who are willing to do so are not invited to be a part of the board, and those people who are on the board, they are not willing to do it because it's not somewhat convenient for the management? Thank you.
It's that old problem, isn't it? If the whole thing's shit, why bother? Why not just go home and drink? Which maybe that's what we should do, just go home and have a drink. I think, again, you've got to start moving beyond one silver bullet that can change things. Because the world doesn't work that way. We know the world doesn't work that way. What I would say to you is, I absolutely, as a newcomer to Kazakhstan, I absolutely understand what you're saying. And I can see where a whole country is in transition. I can see where there would be immense issues, immense problems. I only need to read Kazinform and so on, which I try and do every day, or Capital KZ is the other one. Is there anybody here from Capital KZ? I only have to read them and have a look at the cases coming up in a court to understand you've got your problems. Have you looked at the Westminster government recently? Anybody asks me about working in Kazakhstan, corruption in Kazakhstan, I say, have a look at the UK government just now, where there's a bunch of people who have feathered their own nest. There's a guy who was our health minister, who's an idiot. The guy who was our health minister, during the pandemic, when millions of people were dying, and we needed PPE, we needed the equipment, the protective equipment for our nurses and for our doctors, yeah? He went to the guy who owned the pub. I don't know what the pub equivalent is in Kazakhstan. The pub, yeah? The guy who was the local manager of his pub, yeah? The health minister went to that guy, told him, get your name in, put his name in, gave him a £200 million contract, 200 million for PPE, which the guy then, fulfilled from a Chinese company somewhere. The PPE that they gave to the National Health Service in the middle of the pandemic, when everyone's granny and daughter and everyone else was dying, and this, excuse my number, this bastard had the job of actually looking after us. He gave £200 million to his pub landlord to put it in, get the PPE. The PPE that they supplied couldn't even be used. Yeah? And he hasn't been had up. He isn't in jail. He hasn't been, in fact, he's still a member of parliament, right? So if you think you've got problems, believe me, this institution that counts itself as the mother of parliaments and that has been around there for the last 1,500 years trying to do it right, the one that writes the corporate code and brings it to you and says, you've got to do this, you've got to work in this proper way, they're pretty crap themselves, yeah? So number one, let's remember, it happens everywhere to a certain extent. Number two, you can only change things by actually beginning the process of putting the laws, the regulations, the way of working in place. You also have to have people like you, because there's absolutely no point in Samruk or the government or someone else saying, we need professionals, who can have strength, who can say to executives, no, you're not doing that, that's wrong. You can't have that unless you have organizations like you guys who can give people the confidence and the strength and the learning to be able to actually stand up to people. Believe me, the boardroom that you are describing is exactly the bloody same in Manchester or London or New York or Chicago. Yeah? It's exactly the same boardroom. And it will only change when we make the argument that says, you're not just here to feather your own nest. That's not the job of being a director of a company. If you're going to be a director of the company, you have one major role, is A, to look after that company and to look after the stakeholders who are part of that company. And I know I start to sound like some religious freak when I say that. And I know I can sound as if I believe in fairies, yeah? I don't believe in fairies, but I do believe in people. And I believe that people can change, and I believe that people can be educated, and that our systems can change. I also know it takes time. And as I say, I find it interesting that I can sit and look at some of the things that are happening in Kazakhstan. You're what, 30-odd, 40 years old as a nation, you know, as a new nation in your new form. And I can see progress that we haven't made in 300 years. So remember, you do some things actually quite well, and I sympathise and empathise with all the crap. I'm afraid when you get to my age, I hope you get to my age, you'll have seen an awful lot more crap as you get there. But just keep fighting the good fight, is my advice.
Hello, my name is Rustam. I'm a representative of business. We are now talking about big things, big ideas, sharing beautiful words. But if we land down to the ground, in the end of the day, we want just really to hear what is really being done today in terms of ESG and climate change. I am ex-CFO of the same organization where this lady is from, 2010. At 2010, when we was M&A with a Russian organization, RZD, the same issues were discussed 13 years ago. And today, she says nothing is in process, and it is not even discussed. And the exact question was, how many sessions did you really have on discussing or pushing the ESG idea and climate change in KTЖ in the end of the day? And do you really have any impact on these changes? Because as I see, 13 years passed, the same thing, and nothing is done. So this is a question number one, like 2 or 3 sessions, or really I have impact, or we have these changes, yes or no? This is question number one. И второй вопрос, мне очень круто понравилось, вот вы сказали про независимых, зависимых директоров. Очень круто мы здесь все собрались, и на самом деле такие тусовки, такие мероприятия, наверное, нужно, чтобы посещали не только независимые директора или директора, которым нужно рассказать и говорить, вы должны, вы все должны, вот как мы сегодня слышали, и у нас классно у всех получается, но ничего по факту не получается. Значит, наверное, вот в этой стороне должны сидеть независимые директора, а вот здесь стейкхолдеры, которые должны тоже это слышать. То есть, чтобы стейкхолдер слышал, вот чем вы занимаетесь. А то мы приходим, они говорят, слушай, может потом у нас там сейчас надо налоги выплатить там, или еще что-то. Вот, поэтому, наверное, второй вопрос такой. Может быть, наша организация QID сможет внести такой же вклад, и в один день вот здесь будут стейкхолдеры, вот здесь будут независимые директора, и мы вместе сможем вот эту одну и ту же тему обсуждать. Спасибо.
I'm not terribly sure if you want an answer. Yeah, like I said, a lot of it's shit. Surprise. Show me one part of your life where there's not problems like that. But can you actually make a difference if you're sitting in the boardroom? I hope so. Because if you can't, I'm not terribly sure who can. Is it our job to somehow or other build a respect for each other and a working relationship with the people who are actually the executives in those, because they're the guys who are there day to day? If you think about it, when we're at KTJ, we go along once every 6 weeks, couple of months or something like that. I don't know what the hell they're doing the rest of the time. I'm not wandering around Kazakhstan in a train. don't really want to wander around Kazakhstan in a train. I need to be able to trust the data, the people that are working. I need to be able to know that I'm putting people in place. I need to know that I've done the background checks on them. I need to know that they know what they're going to do. I'll still get it wrong. You know? I hope I can get it from 9 times out of 10 getting it wrong to 1 time out of 10 getting it wrong. But I'll still get it wrong because I ain't God. I'm just an independent director. Can I make it easier for myself? Yes, if I can put some processes in place that give me more confidence that the decisions I am making are actually being carried out by the executives. That, you know, and I am able at the next meeting to look at the data and say, okay, I can see you've done it. Or I can say, look, guys, I've told you 3 times at the last 3 meetings to do this bloody thing. You're still not doing it. It's still not going to be great. I mean, we tried to take a wee printing company in Scotland. My Scotticism. A small printing company. We tried to take it from about 6 million up to about 26 million because we reckoned it could grow. And they could have sold it on. And we'd got to around 15, 16 million. And we had a chief executive who was larger than life. He was the god, yeah? And he would come to board meetings and we would say, how are things going? Are we doing this? And he'd say, everything is wonderful. We are going ahead. Everything is fantastic. We're at 15 million. We've 26 million just round the corner. Great, away we go. Within 3 weeks, we were having daily meetings to judge whether or not the company was still a going concern. Because this, excuse my language again, this bastard had lied to us. He'd lied to us for 6 months. He'd told us that X was the case. And of course, as an independent director, you're trusting the numbers that you're being shown. And every time we would ask a question about the numbers and say, oh, hang about, this doesn't seem to be quite sitting with this. And he'd say, oh, this is because blah, blah, blah. And in the end, we caught him out, we sacked him, we had to get rid of him. But we almost lost the whole company. All you can do is put the processes in place to try and make the decisions in a confident and comfortable way. And you won't always get it right. Does that mean that we should just be cynical and say the whole lot are a bunch of shits and we don't want anything to do with them? I hope not. I genuinely hope not. I hope that we believe in each other and kind of confidence in each other enough to think either, okay, he made a mistake, let's give him another chance, or he's an idiot, get him out, yeah? Or bring in someone new that you've actually got some confidence in and so on. I hear what you're saying and I feel your pain. I've been there. But if we don't believe in each other, if we don't try and grow this body of knowledge of governance, what have we got? What are you left with at that point? There will always be someone to blame. The really difficult part is not finding someone to blame. It's finding someone to work alongside. That's the really difficult part. Blame's easy. Blame culture is easy. But hopefully we can actually build friends, we can build ways of going forward. But, I've also got the scars on my back, the same as you.
Thank you, Ian, for such wonderful comments. The last question.
Про это, потому что чувствительная тема, нашла отклик, знакомые, хорошие отношения у нас. Отклик нашла насчет независимости директоров, действительно. Мы обсуждаем это тоже в Казахстанской ассоциации. Во-первых, у нас не так много компаний пока привлекают независимых директоров. Нацкомпании, потом различные дочерние структуры соответствующих государственных органов. И вы правы, они к нам не так сильно обращаются пока. Мы это все формируем, находят независимых директоров, потому что вы правы, где-то им нужны люди, которые будут где-то с какими-то решениями соглашаться. Мой личный опыт какой? Мне, во-первых, повезло, что если я работаю на каких-то компаниях, связанных с национальными компаниями, с государственными, там мало платят. Я там могу проявлять принципиальность и не согласовывать некоторые вещи. В других компаниях, которые я сам выбирал и пришел независимым директором, там повезло, что продвинутые руководители, члены правления, продвинутые акционеры. Это есть. Но это у меня частный случай, мой персональный. А это вообще большая работа, чтобы поднимать статус независимых директоров. И здесь должно быть заинтересовано государство. Это очень чувствительный вопрос, очень емкий, трудоемкий, большой. Еще раз возвращаясь к господину Ульфу Курке, 20-летний опыт работы в качестве независимого директора по многих национальных компаниях Казахстана очень много может рассказать. Но мы вместе были независимым директором в МФЦА. Прекрасная структура, корпоративное управление на самом высоком уровне. Здесь нас и заставили пройти сдать экзамен через IOD и так далее. Здесь все на уровне. То есть но здесь были, во-первых, законодательная основа, первый руководитель был такой, все правления и все члены совета директоров. И в этом случае Институт независимых директоров работал. Но это от каждого из нас зависит, наверное. Где-то надо будет проявлять принципиальность, где-то государство должно понимать, что от этого не уйдешь. И, наверное, действительно, внешнее окружение. Где-то правильная структура регулирования. Я хочу сказать, что в банковском, страховом секторе, господин Ульф тоже работал, член совета директоров, там все зарегулировано и четко прописаны, например, аффилированные лица, риск на одного заемщика, общий риск, ликвидность. И там независимым директорам легко это соблюдать, легко понимать, где это лица связаны и где риски возрастают. И мы много имеем кейсов по факту, где акционеров после этого наказывали, не допускали к этому рынку. И сейчас многие акционеры в банках очень щепетильно относятся к этому. И здесь Институт независимых директоров работает реально не на 100%, может быть, но реально работает. То есть это благодаря произошло регулятору, Национальному банку, агентству финансового надзора, благодаря Big Four, благодаря рейтингу агентствам, благодаря требованиям со стороны уполномоченных органов, когда вы делали IPO, многие банки. То есть это такая большая работа, она действительно пока имеет место. Но еще раз хочу сказать, мы должны сравнивать и с другими соседними странами и республиками. У нас гораздо лучше ситуация. И мы можем где-то проявлять принципиальность, да. И оно должно быть на всех уровнях. Корпоративное управление, стандарты, было озвучено давно, да? 20 лет назад, 15 лет озвучено, 10 лет. До сих пор у нас не внедряется, но ситуация меняется. Поэтому я понимаю, что вопрос такой. Иногда мы можем и посмеяться, и иногда сильно покритиковать, пожаловаться и так далее. Но все зависит от каждого из нас, я думаю. И через определенные площадки, она недавно существует, Казахстан Independent Director, на самом деле. Но мы много вопросов подняли и набираем сил, начинаем спорить. Да, я ее опять-таки не рекламирую, я здесь как на общественных началах.
Рекламируйте, почему нет? Рекламируйте. Спасибо большое. На самом деле, да, последний вопрос, если можно.
Dina,
Yes.
Dina, let me just tell you one story. Yeah. Fred Goodwin. Have you heard of Fred Goodwin? Fred Goodwin was the chief executive of RBS. You've heard of RBS. At the time, RBS, when Fred Goodwin was the chief executive, RBS was, I think, the biggest bank in the world, just about. They were massive, absolutely massive, based in Scotland, yeah? And I was working for the Mail and for the post offices. I had a campaign going to convince RBS to let poor people be able to use the post offices in order to use their bank accounts and so on, because poor people did not have bank branches and so on. So I said, okay, let the poor people using RBS branch accounts use post offices. And I was quite good at it. I got lots and lots of people to put lots and lots of pressure and really get right up the nose of Fred Goodwin, who at the time presumably would have been the most powerful businessman in the world, yeah, or one of them, yeah? So Fred, being an absolute person, Fred phoned up my boss and said, sack MacKay. Sack him right now. He's been giving me a hard time. I'm your biggest customer. Get him sacked. And my boss said, I've looked into this. Ian is doing what I asked him to do. Go away. And Fred had to go away again. I have never been so happy at the time of the crash, despite the fact that I got slaughtered personally. The happiest moment was when Fred Goodwin got his comeuppance and got sacked at RBS. So the other thing for you to remember, and what we've been talking about here, is there's also kismet. You know, sometimes those bad people get their comeuppance and get what they deserved. And I was very pleased when Fred Goodwin got his. So, small story.
Thank you so much. My name is Gulnora Muhammadiyeva. I'm originally from Tajikistan, but for 4 years I live in Kazakhstan. I joined QID in January, so currently I work for Aga Khan Foundation as Global Lead for Gender Equality and Civil Society. In my previous role, I was with UK Department for International Development in Tajikistan. I was managing the corporate governance projects with IFC. So it's really good to see this kind of big interest around the ESG. I mean, we know it was on and off the agenda. You are now in the region. You see that the environmental issues are real. We live in the region where at least 3 countries have really high vulnerability index when it comes to the threats of climate change. The water issues are real. We see the pockets of conflict at the border, etc. So my question is around the people and the accountability mechanisms. So how can we make sure that the younger generation are really interested, and how can we make sure that there is a transparent public monitoring systems? Because any decisions that the large companies, the small, mediums are taking today will have a huge impact on the future generation. And at the same time, we talk about the integrity and independence of some of the directors. We do see now the young generation are more engaged into this kind of conversation, but to what extent the large companies are interested? And my question is, if you could bring 2 or 3 examples where there was really successful public engagement and improving transparency, especially from public-private partnerships, because I think it's a really huge topic. And also in Kazakhstan now, I live for 4 years, I see the access to information is there, but I don't see a really kind of independent civil society actors who can go and challenge, some of these policies. Thank you.
Did you hear what he said? He said, I should answer this because I'm old and he's young. Yeah. The hope for the world, if we were sitting here 50 years ago, which we possibly would not be, the hope for the world is always the younger generation. It is their world that the world that we are affecting is the world that they will inherit. And any sensible young person is going to take an interest in what is going to happen to them further down the road. I am very hopeful when I look at the statistics of where is the involvement, particularly in these social issues, and in fact, not just climate, gender equality, some of the other issues that are there alongside, because we get a bit caught up with just climate change. We've got to remember the diversity issues. You heard the stats that I was quoting. Happily, what I hear most of all is it is young voices that are raising that. It is young people who are discussing that. They might also be doing 10 other things. They might be playing a game while they're doing it. But you're beginning, I think, to see a return to the kind of engagement by young people in real issues that will affect them in the future, that perhaps for a period there, they were not engaging. And that was our fault as well. We created that apathy. We gave them hope, and then we took it away. I'll give you one example. In Scotland, I told you that I was the chair of IOD during the referendum for Scottish independence. Yeah? You've all seen Braveheart, so you know how strongly the Scots feel about independence. And we had an enormous debate. Generally speaking, as in my own family, I voted no. Both of my kids voted yes. It was the young people who saw the possibilities that could be there. If I'd known that we were going to have Brexit and Boris Johnson, I would have voted yes 14 times in order to get us away from those idiots in Westminster. But it was the young who drove that campaign. It is the young people, I told you, even within investment circles, it is young investors who are actually prepared to take a financial hit in order to support some of our ESG stuff. We constantly, within businesses, and if you talk to the politicians, they are obsessed with the idea of how do we engage young people. I would say to them, you know what? The young people will engage themselves. Social media in particular, the modern social media means that young people are engaged anyway. You know, when they've stopped looking at pictures and videos about cats, they will become interested in the social issues. The folk we should actually be engaging with are folk like me. The people who are in positions of authority, who don't have that youth, who don't have that future to look forward, but have power. Those are the people that we need to convince that this is the way to go. By all means, use the young people and their energy to help convince them, yeah? But it isn't, you know, it isn't the young people who will make this. And I would actually be fearful, and I saw this in the referendum campaign, I would be fearful, and actually the other example is Obama. When you saw Obama being elected, I would be very fearful that if we engage young people on a mission of activity and campaigning for change, and we don't deliver, what you get then is apathy. What you get is those same young people saying, it doesn't matter. You know, don't get engaged, it'll never happen, and just cynicism coming from that. What I would be doing is getting those young people engaged to change the minds of other people, of the people in power. That, I think, is where we've got to engage them, in my view. And I think that is beginning, and I would very happily go back and look out one or two areas. I suspect that you've seen some of the evidence the same as me. You know, there have been good public-private partnerships that have delivered on that. I think it is perfectly possible both within the political sphere and within the business sphere. There's also a hell of a lot of pretending that we're doing something for young people when really we're just doing it for ourselves. And I don't want to be the dad who is going out on the dance floor and pretending that I know how to dance. I want to get the young people onto the dance floor and doing the dancing instead. So I think that's a really good question. I think they are the future. But it's not them that will make the change. They are the troops that we will use to make the others make the change, in my view.
Thank you. Thank you, Jens. Thank you so much. Спасибо большое, Куат. Спасибо нашим замечательным спикерам за сегодняшнюю площадку. Благодарим аудиторию за не менее замечательные вопросы.